He married his own mother, and the town let it happen. In a cabin behind the churchyard, they lived as widow and son, but the birth ledger says otherwise. A stillborn baby, buried without a father's name. A sealed root cellar, exposed by floodwaters, filled with children bound in linen and reed. The county physician sees something no God-fearing soul can explain: deformity, precision, and a pattern written in bone. Was he her only child, or just the first? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. The first golden rays of sunlight caught the morning dew on the whitewashed boards of Willowbank Chapel. Reverend Thaddeus Bain paused at the top step, his worn Bible tucked under one arm, watching the scene unfold on the muddy road below. A covered wagon sat listing to one side, its wheels mired deep in the spring muck. Beside it stood a woman in widow's black, her boots buried to the ankles in clay-rich soil. "Ma'am," he called out, descending the steps. "Are you in need of assistance?" The woman turned, revealing sharp features beneath her bonnet. Her hands, red and chapped, clutched a sodden shawl around thin shoulders. "Martha Farrow, Reverend. We've come from Vicksburg." Behind the wagon, a boy, tall for his age but with an oddly fluid way of moving, silently lifted a heavy crate of iron cookware. His arms didn't shake under the weight. He set it down without a sound, never looking up. "My son, Jonas," Martha said, though the boy made no acknowledgement of his name. Within days, the Farrows had taken up residence in old Wendell's hunting shack near Bayou Trammell. The building listed as badly as their wagon had, its cypress boards green with moss, but Martha scrubbed it until the windows gleamed. Church ladies brought cornbread and advice about local washing work. "She's particular with the linens," Mrs. Whitaker reported at Sunday service. "Gets the altar cloth whiter than snow." Martha's prices were fair, her work meticulous. Soon she was handling the chapel's washing, and Reverend Bain hired her to help with the rectory cleaning. Jonas found work too, clearing brush from the chapel grounds. He wielded the axe with unsettling precision, taking down saplings with single strokes. Other boys his age tried to draw him into conversation, but he responded only in monosyllables, his light gray eyes focused on some middle distance, quiet but fast. Tom Wesley said after watching Jonas clear an entire field in one afternoon. "Never seen anybody work like that, like he don't get tired." "Got himself man's shoulders on a boy's frame," added Wesley's father. "But there's something about his face that ain't right, like looking at still water too long." Reverend Bain noticed it too, the way Jonas moved with unnatural grace, how he never seemed to blink. The boy worked without complaint, without rest, without ever looking directly at anyone. Even more curious was his relationship with Martha. They rarely spoke, yet seemed to communicate through slight gestures, shared glances. In his study that night, Bain pulled out the circuit ledger. The March entry listed only Martha Farrow, widow, with no mention of a child. He crossed to his desk, where a lantern cast yellow light across his pastoral diary. Dipping his pen, he wrote, "Young Jonas Farrow continues to disturb my peace, though I cannot name the reason. He performs his duties without fault, yet never once looked at his mother the way a son should." The next morning, Martha brought the church employment papers to sign. Bain watched as she filled out the forms in careful script. Under relations, she listed Jonas not as son, but simply as helper. The brass bell above Willowbank's post office door jangled violently as Mrs. Agatha James burst in, her bonnet dripping from the morning mist. Several patrons waiting for the mail coach jumped at her entrance. "My Etta!" she cried, gripping the counter's edge. "She ain't come home!" Her dark fingers trembled as she pressed them against the worn wood. She went to deliver eggs to Reverend Bain's rectory yesterday evening, but never made it back. Postmaster Wilson dropped his sorting and grabbed his coat. "Samuel," he called to his son, "run, fetch Sheriff Ashby. Tell him it's urgent." The boy darted out into the grey morning. Within the hour, Sheriff Curtis Ashby limped up the muddy street, his cavalry boots leaving deep impressions. A small crowd had gathered outside the post office, speaking in hushed tones. Mrs. James sat on a wooden chair, describing her daughter's clothes to Deputy Morris. A blue cotton dress, patched at the elbows, and sturdy work boots handed down from her older sister. 12 years old. Mrs. James repeated, twisting her apron. She knows better than to wander after dark. Sheriff Ashby dispatched Deputies Morris and Tate on horseback to search the path between the rectory and the James home. Dark clouds gathered overhead as they rode out, promising more rain. At the rectory, Reverend Bain stood in his study doorway, his high collar wilting in the humidity. "Yes, Etta delivered the eggs as usual," he confirmed, consulting his daily ledger. "I paid her 15 cents and sent her home before dusk. She was unharmed when she left, I can assure you." The first heavy drops began to fall as Sheriff Ashby questioned merchants along the town's main street. No one had seen Etta after she left the rectory. By mid-afternoon, the rain fell in sheets, turning the roads to soup. Deputy Morris returned, leading his horse through the downpour. "Found her basket," he reported, water streaming from his hat brim. "Overturned beside the gully path, eggs broken. No blood or signs of struggle. But," he hesitated. Tom Wesley mentioned seeing Jonas Farrow digging what he called a personal trench near the bayou yesterday. Sheriff Ashby frowned, scribbling in his notebook. The rain had already flooded the low roads and was washing out Beaumont's cane fields. Any tracks or evidence would be destroyed. That evening, in his office above the jail, Sheriff Ashby held his lamp close to the page. The steady drumming of rain on the tin roof nearly drowned out his pen scratches as he made his final entry. "Case presumed drowning. No body recovered. Unlikely foul play." He closed the notebook and locked it in his desk. Outside his window, the swollen creek carried debris past the Farrow cabin. Among the branches and cotton waste tumbling in the current, something caught in the moonlight. A leather harness, its brass buckle inscribed with 3 letters, EFJ. Dawn crept through the stained glass windows of Willowbank Chapel, casting colored shadows across the vestry floor. Reverend Thaddeus Bain's key scraped in the iron lock. The leather-bound birth ledger needed updating 3 spring babies born to sharecropper families last week. The heavy door creaked open. Bain paused, squinting at the lectern. The ledger already lay open, its pages ruffled by the draft. He hadn't left it that way. Moving closer, he saw fresh ink glistening on the page. The handwriting was hurried, unfamiliar. Stillborn, female, mother, Martha, Farrow. Father, no date, no witness signatures, just those stark words condemning the page. Bain's hands trembled as he traced the entry. Martha Farrow had shown no signs of, but then, he remembered, the loose dresses in winter, the absence from Wednesday prayers, the way she'd taken to washing linens after dark when the town slept. That afternoon, he found Martha hanging sheets behind the rectory. Her face remained impassive as he described the ledger entry. "Lies," she said flatly, never pausing in her work. "Someone means to shame me." Her movements were precise, mechanical, but whispers had already begun. Sarah Conley, the midwife's assistant, spoke of blood-stained cloths, discovered smoldering behind Martha's cabin 3 nights ago. Mary Beth Tucker, who took in washing, swore she'd seen Jonas carrying fresh linens at midnight, his face wet with tears. The boy was weeping, something awful. Mary Beth insisted to anyone who'd listen. Never heard such sounds from him before, like a wounded animal. Dr. Elijah Kane arrived from the county seat, his blind mule picking its way down the muddy street. The physician's worn leather bag swung at his side as he approached Martha's door. "Mrs. Farrow," he called out, "I must examine you. There are concerns." The door remained shut. Through the window they glimpsed her shadow moving away. Reverend Bain retreated to his study, memories surfacing like stones in a creek bed. Martha's figure had thickened months ago, her movements growing careful. The town had noticed but kept silent. Even Jonas had changed, hovering closer to her, watching with those unsettling grey eyes. That evening, Bain's hands shook as he carefully tore the damning page from the ledger. The rough edges caught, leaving paper fragments in the binding. He opened his family Bible, the one his father had carried north from Tennessee during the war, and slipped the birth record between Chronicles and Psalms. The torn page settled into its hiding place like a secret taking root. Outside his window, he watched Martha hanging one last sheet in the dying light. Jonas stood nearby, still as a post, his face turned toward the darkening woods. "Doctor," Kane's mule clicked past on the street below, heading back to the county seat without examining his patient. The physician's bag looked as heavy-going as it had, coming full of questions that would find no answers in Willowbank that night. Heat shimmered off the packed dirt road as Horace Bellamy wheeled his easel cart toward the Farrow cabin. Sweat darkened his corduroy coat, but he refused to remove it. A portraitist must maintain appearances. The Bellamy, Mississippi summer had turned the air thick as molasses. Martha Farrow sat rigid on her porch chair, her black widow's dress absorbing the punishing Sunday. Jonas loomed behind her, shirtless and pale despite the season, his chest unmarked by work or weather. Neither spoke as Bellamy arranged his materials. Perhaps the late afternoon light would be more flattering, Bellamy suggested, dabbing his brow with a handkerchief. "This will do," Martha replied. Her voice was flat as a dried creek bed. Bellamy began with broad charcoal strokes, blocking out their forms, Martha's thin shoulders, Jonas's towering frame. The boy's hand came to rest on his mother's shoulder, a gesture that should have seemed protective, but instead made Bellamy's fingers hesitate. Martha smiled then, not the warm expression of a proud mother, but something else. Something that made Bellamy's charcoal scratch too hard, leaving an ugly mark he'd need to soften later. "Mrs. Farrow, if you could rest your hands naturally," he instructed, fighting to keep his voice steady. Her fingers settled on her belly, an unconscious echo of maternal comfort or memory. Jonas's grip tightened visibly on her shoulder. Neither seemed to notice the other's touch, yet their bodies angled together with an intimacy that made Bellamy's skin prickle despite the heat. The portrait took shape. Martha's dark eyes holding something hungry, Jonas staring past the easel with that unblinking gaze. Their poses suggested connection beyond blood, possession beyond protection. When Bellamy delivered the finished painting to Reverend Bain's rectory the next morning, he'd softened the worst implications, but enough remained. He watched the preacher's face as the cloth cover was removed. "Remarkable likeness," Bain murmured, but his hand trembled slightly as he hung it beside the church announcements. Throughout the day, parishioners stopped to view the new edition. Most hurried past after a single glance. Mrs. Tucker crossed, herself. Deacon Phillips muttered something about unnatural closeness before turning away. That night, in the stifling attic room above the general store, Bellamy's journal lay open on his traveling desk. The lamp oil was running low as he wrote. Their posture was not maternal, it was marital. The boy's hand claimed rather than comforted. The mother's smile spoke of secrets deeper than grief, I fear I have captured something that should have remained hidden. He closed the journal and pulled out the original charcoal sketch, the raw version, before he'd sanitized it for public display. This he carefully folded and slipped into the false bottom of his paint crate, beneath the turpentine bottles and spare brushes. The next morning, before the sun could turn the air to steam, Bellamy's cartwheels left twin tracks in the dew-damp road leading north out of Willowbank. The precious sketch rode beneath his feet, a truth too dangerous to leave behind. In the distance, the church bells began their morning toll, calling the faithful to prayer. Bellamy did not look back. Sheriff Curtis Ashby's boots sank into the marsh grass as he followed the dark trail toward the abandoned trapper's shack. The setting sun cast long shadows through the cypress trees, and mosquitoes swarmed thick in the humid air. Deputy Wilson held a tin lantern ahead, its weak flame barely piercing the growing darkness. The blood trail fresh enough to still be red wound between rotting stumps before disappearing under the shack's sagging door. The structure listed to one side, half sunken into the boggy earth, its cypress planks green with moss. "Watch your step," Ashby warned, testing each board of the narrow porch. The wood creaked, but held. The stench hit them first, a deep, animal rot that cut through even the swamp's natural decay. Wilson gagged, turning his face away. Ashby pressed his handkerchief to his nose and pushed the door open with his rifle barrel. The lantern light revealed scattered straw, small animal bones, and dark stains soaked into the warped floorboards. In the corner lay a child's shoe, caked with mud. Ashby's throat tightened as he recognized it, the same type the Grady boy had worn. "There, Sheriff." Wilson's lantern illuminated something metallic, half buried in the dirt floor. Ashby knelt, ignoring the protest in his old war wound, and brushed away the soil. A rusted harness, sized for a child's chest, emerged from the earth. Crude letters had been scratched into the metal. F.J. "Etta Francis James," Ashby whispered, "the missing girl from last year." His hands shook as he wrapped the evidence in his handkerchief. They questioned Jonas Farrow the next morning in the church vestry. The boy sat unnaturally still, his pale eyes fixed on some middle distance. Yes, he'd been near the shack. No, he hadn't seen young Clem. Yes, he sometimes trapped small game there. "What were you dragging in that burlap sack on Tuesday?" Ashby pressed. "Rabbit carcasses," Jonas replied without inflection. "For Mother's stew." Martha Farrow burst in then, black skirts rustling. "My boy's been ill with fever," she insisted, her thin hand gripping Jonas's shoulder. "Delirious most nights. He couldn't have done anything." But Ashby had seen the methodical arrangement of bones in the shack. No fevered mind had done that. That evening, he drafted a notice for the Natchez Weekly Democrat. Seeking information. Any persons having knowledge of Martha Farrow, widow, and son, Jonas, claimed arrival from Vicksburg spring of 1871, essential to ongoing investigation. Contact Sheriff C. Ashby, Willowbank Parish. The notice ran 3 consecutive Sundays. On the 4th Wednesday, a telegram arrived from Reverend Howard Pierce of First Baptist Vicksburg. Woman named Farrow, arrived alone stop. No child in her company stop, departed north after one night lodging stop. Ashby read the words twice, the yellow paper trembling in his hands. One line stood out. Arrived, alone. He thought of Jonas's unnatural stillness, his dead, fish eyes, of Martha's protective hovering, of the missing children, and the bloody trail and the scratched harness in the shack. The telegram crumpled in his fist as he strode toward the courthouse to request an exhumation order. Whatever lay buried behind the Farrow cabin, it was time to dig it up. The Crystal Springs station master's office smelled of coal smoke and wet telegraph papers. Clyde Dellum, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, pulled his ledger from beneath a stack of freight manifests as Sheriff Ashby waited, mud still caking his boots from the 60-mile ride. "Came through about a week past," Dellum said, running his finger down the page. "Odd sort. Traded carved things for day, old bread from Murphy's store. Never spoke above a whisper, kept his eyes down like he was counting boards in the floor." Ashby pulled out the wanted circular, its edges softened from repeated folding. "This the one?" Dellum adjusted his brass-rimmed spectacles. "That's him right enough. Broad in the shoulders, moved like he was twice his age. Wore a canvas coat too big for him, might have been a woman's." "What was he carving?" Ashby's pen scratched against his notepad. "Little dolls. Used possum bones, mostly. Some rabbit. Careful work unsettling, careful. Had a whole collection in a tobacco sack. Store owner's girl said he'd line them up on the loading dock while he worked, all facing east like they was praying. They found Jonas that afternoon, huddled in the corner of an empty boxcar. His satchel yielded 7 bone dolls, each no longer than a man's finger. They had been carved with obsessive precision, tiny faces, with painted eyes and mouths bound shut with thread. One bore the unmistakable curly hair and round cheeks of Clem Grady. At the Crystal Springs jailhouse, Jonas sat perfectly still during his deposition, hands folded as if in prayer. Judge Harrison's questions echoed in the bare room. "State your full name and age." "Jonas Farrow. Mama says I'm 19 winters. Where is your mother now?" "Wherever the blood calls her." The questions continued for hours. Jonas answered in the same flat tone, his grey eyes never focusing on any one spot. Only once did his composure crack when asked about the dolls. "Mama said I'm the first man," he whispered, fingers tracing patterns on the table. "The rest is just payment for the new blood coming." 2 days later, they found Martha Farrow in a boarding house in Brandon, Mississippi. She sat in a rocking chair, staring at nothing, mumbling about sacred lineages and the first son's right. The attending physician declared her non compos mentis. She was transferred to the Louisiana State Asylum under heavy sedation. Dr. Kane arrived from Willowbank with his leather case of documents. "We've searched every record from Vicksburg to Natchez," he reported to the circuit judge. "No birth certificate for Jonas. No marriage license for Martha. It's as if they appeared from nowhere in 2071. The courthouse clerk stamped the official hearing notice with mechanical precision. "The 12th of June, 1876. County of Claiborne versus Jonas Farrow." The heavy steel stamp echoed through the empty office like a coffin lid closing. Under the single gas lamp, Dr. Kane opened his medical bag and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay something white and misshapen, the malformed skull from the root cellar, its strange angles and fused plates telling a story too horrible to voice in polite company. He began his examination, measuring each deformity with calipers, preparing the report that would reveal the true nature of Jonas Farrow's origins. Heat shimmered through the tall windows of the Claiborne County Courthouse, making the packed gallery shimmer like a mirage. Spectators fanned themselves with folded papers, their whispers rising and falling like cicada songs as Jonas Farrow shuffled into the courtroom. His iron chains scraped against the wooden floor, each step measured and unhurried. In the back pew, Reverend Bain kept his head bowed, fingers working his worn Bible's spine. The leather had begun to crack, just as his composure had these past months. He wouldn't look up, couldn't bear to see the boy he'd welcomed into his church standing trial for such unspeakable acts. Dr. Elijah Kane approached the witness stand, his medical bag clutched tight. The leather creaked as he opened it, removing a cloth-wrapped bundle. I present evidence gathered from the root cellar behind the Farrow residence, he announced, voice steady despite the gravity of his findings. He unwrapped the malformed skull carefully. Note the pronounced occipital bun, the fused parietal sutures. His finger traced the aberrant bone structure. These deformities occur in approximately 8% of births resulting from parent-child unions. The frequency increases dramatically in multi-generational cases. The courthouse fell silent, save for the slow creak of the ceiling fan. Doctor, Kane continued, the victim's skeleton shows clear markers of consanguineous parentage, likely mother, son, coupling, spanning at least 2 generations. Sarah Beth Miller, a midwife of 30 years' experience, testified next. I knew something wasn't right when Martha took to wearing them loose dresses in spring of '74, she said, twisting her apron. She'd burn her soiled linens at night, thinking nobody'd notice, but I seen the blood, and I heard sounds from that cabin no mother should make with her son. The defense attorney, caught, appointed and sweating through his collar, attempted an insanity plea. The boy's clearly touched, he argued, gesturing at Jonas's blank stare. No right-minded person could commit such acts. But Judge Clayton Harrison remained unmoved. The methodical nature of these crimes suggests calculation, not madness, he declared, his gavel hovering. The court finds the defendant, Jonas Farrow, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. Sentence: death by hanging, to be carried out within 14 days. Jonas didn't flinch. His gray eyes remained fixed on the hangman's rope, coiled on the bailiff's desk, almost yearning. As the gallery cleared, Deputy Morris discovered the courthouse clerk in a panic. The church record book, she stammered, holding up the leather-bound volume. The entire year of 1870, 2 torn out clean, like someone knew exactly what to remove. 2 weeks later, dawn painted the jail yard in shades of pearl and rust. Jonas stood on the gallows, still wearing that same empty expression. When asked for final words, he simply smiled, a gesture so incongruous with the moment that several witnesses turned away. The trapdoor dropped at 6:17 a.m. In the sudden silence that followed, someone noticed a letter flutter from between the pages of an old hymnal left on the gallows steps. The unsigned note, written in a shaking hand, read only, "She bore another. He walks still." The morning breeze caught the paper, carrying it into the dust-filled light of a Mississippi summer. Reverend William Porter's fingers trembled as he held the yellowed paper that had slipped from between the pages of the 1,870 Methodist hymnal. The evening light through the vestry windows cast long shadows across the dusty floor of Willowbank Chapel. The letter's faded ink barely visible. She had more than one, and not all were stillborn. He recognized the careful, measured handwriting similar to entries in the old church ledgers. Could it be Reverend Bain's hand, the man who'd fled town after his house burned in '78, leaving only ash and whispered rumors behind? Porter had heard the stories since taking the position last spring. Tales of Martha Farrow and her son Jonas, of missing children and a flooded root cellar. But this letter suggested something worse, something unfinished. Last month, Elijah Wade, a trapper working the cypress stands near Bayou Trammell, stumbled into the general store with wild eyes. Saw him clear as day, Wade had stammered, hands shaking as he accepted a glass of water. Man, thing in the swamp, face split down the middle like God himself tried to tear him in two. No words in him, just sounds like a wounded dog. The sheriff dismissed it as marsh fever talking, but then others began to speak of similar sightings. A figure ducking between trees at dusk, footprints too large and misshapen leading into the water, small animals found arranged in peculiar patterns. In 1881, the courthouse archive reported a break-in. Only one item taken: Horace Bellamy's infamous portrait of Martha and Jonas Farrow. The frame was found splintered, the canvas carefully cut away. Rumors circulated of a wealthy Vicksburg collector who'd paid handsomely for the piece, wanting to study its unique emotional qualities. But no proof ever surfaced. Porter folded the letter carefully, considering whether to alert authorities. But what could they investigate after 7 years? The Farrow case was sealed, its horrors carefully buried beneath procedure and time. That morning, the Henderson family had moved into the old Farrow cabin, newly whitewashed, its dark history unknown to the young couple and their golden-haired daughter, Emma. Mrs. Henderson had smiled, saying how peaceful it felt among the cypress trees. At dusk, Porter heard the church bell ring urgent, frantic peals echoing across town. He rushed to his window to see Mrs. Henderson running down the muddy road, screaming her daughter's name. Emma had been playing in the yard, her mother said between sobs. Just for a moment, she'd stepped inside to unpack dishes. When she returned, the girl was gone. Only a small rag doll remained in the dirt, its stitched face turned toward the darkening swamp. The sheriff organized a search party, but the spring shadows were already long. As lanterns bobbed through the cypress stands, Porter returned to his study and opened the letter again. The paper crackled as he smoothed it, revealing a final line he'd missed before, written so faintly it was barely visible. Some bloodlines don't end with hanging. He thought of Jonas Farrow's strange smile on the gallows, of Reverend Bain's missing ledger pages, of Martha's secrets taken to her asylum grave. The questions lingered like smoke. Who was the other child? Was Jonas truly the beginning of this horror, or merely its continuation? Outside his window, the search party's lights grew dimmer as they moved deeper into the swamp. Somewhere in that darkness, perhaps, answers waited. But some truths, Porter realized, were better left in shadow.